Welcome to Room for More Art, a dialogue series where we sit with architects and designers to explore spaces through the lens of art and design. This episode is powered by Decoraids, making interiors more thoughtful with their smart wall panels and ceiling solutions that are as practical as they are beautiful.
Hi, I'm Jay Shah. I'm the principal of Draw Design Research and Workshop. We are a Mumbai-based design firm. For us, the practice lies somewhere in between thought and creation. Drawing for us is not simply a tool, but it's an associative act. So we find a lot of joy, not in just what is made, but I think in the process of making itself. We work within architecture, interior design, landscape, products, research, and we find a lot of kind of a joy in experimenting with each opportunity of a project that we get. So this experimentation ranges from material to spatial planning to how we can think of conventional space and kind of break the barriers of that. So that is what we do at Joe. I'd say my first ever kind of experience or interaction with art really came when I was a child, when I was in school. I remember we used to have an art teacher who allowed us to draw and paint on nearly anything and everything as a medium. And I think just the fascination that a child has with color, with surfaces, with material, I think really pushed my imaginations and helped me express a lot better with art. And when you join architecture college, that sort of envelope of what you consider art completely sort of shifts and changes. So then for me, art started to become more about space, about the way that the light filtered in, about material, about surfaces, about floors, about thresholds, about a lot of other things which kind of are not considered conventional art, but also are compositional exercises of making, right? So I think that's what really kind of pushed me into a deeper understanding of how art and architecture kind of are melded together as a subject. And for me, a lot of art is also about collected objects. It's about memory. It's about experience. It's about a very personal sort of connect to where you are and who you are. So that's how my entire house in my house is populated with a lot of objects that I have collected from different cultures, different places, different people. And they're all curated in a way that I'm almost living in midst of all of this. And I think that is my own personal connection to how I like my art to be. I would like to be surrounded by it. And that's how we also kind of approach every project within our practice to kind of see how art and architecture can work together to make space. Uh, I'd say art is very pivotal to design in general. I don't see the two of them very different because, like I mentioned earlier, I think both, in some sense, are invoking a feeling. Both, in some sense, are evoking an experience. Both are compositional exercises. Uh, so to me, art and architecture are not necessarily different. So I would never consider art to be a layer that has just been slapped onto a space. I think what starts with the visceral idea of how we kind of approach the spatial design of a space is embedded with the way that the light is going to filter in and create a composition, or how materials come together, or how art is going to be kind of a very pivotal experience of that particular space. And I don't necessarily mean art always is something that's kind of put on a wall as a painting. It could also be sculpture, it could be ceramics, it could be the way that the flooring has been done with patterns in it. It could be the way that you've composed a window just to let you look at a tree outside, and that to me is also art. I mean that's what an architect is supposed to do with the project that he gets. So I kind of feel like that understanding of art is very, very pivotal to design. And many a times I also find myself taking inspiration from art to kind of devise and derive concepts to make a lot of our projects. So if I for example look at Sujimoto's photographs of seascapes, and the way that he's got sort of like made these gorgeous black and white photographs of uh, the paper space cut right in the center with the horizon and the sky above it and the sea below it and the calmness of the sea. I feel like I derive so much of that to also make compositions within my project, or how we design especially some of our projects. So we actually use Sujimoto's paintings to kind of work with in one of our projects that we're doing, which is a house by the sea. So we kind of looked at seascapes to actually derive everything that we're doing within that project. So to me, art is not just an additional layer that goes into a project, but sometimes it's also something that drives the project completely from a concept to its final stages. When you ask me that question, I think two things come to my mind. One, of course, like I mentioned, we used Sujimoto's paintings as a conceptual idea to really design a space or a home because it was by the sea and the sea was omnipresent from every sort of window that we had within the house. So that was very pivotal to kind of also capture that essence of the sea, the glistening surfaces. Sometimes when the sea recedes, what's the texture like when you can start to see the sand under the kind of patterns it forms, and all of those have been used for the wall finishes, for the way that we've done the flooring, for the way that we've kind of designed furniture, or even soft furnishings and upholstery for that matter. And the second project where we've kind of used art and has been very pivotal to the way that we've designed the space has been in an office in Kolkata, which was a 50-year-old home to a family in Kolkata. We kind of redesigned that completely into a very contemporary company secretary office for the same family. And we've retained the entire character of the Haveli sort of house that they've made for themselves 50 years ago and completely redone interiors within, where everything that we've done in design is like a surgery. So we've removed parts from it very carefully, added the new parts that we wanted to. And within the adding of the new parts, I think art has played a pivotal role. So we got these massive, say, 20 feet tall leather puppets from Andhra because the family is also a collector of a lot of Indian art. So some of it they already had, some of it we went and sourced again. And again, instead of using that piece of artwork as just something that went onto a wall and could become a beautiful piece just as is, we actually sandwiched in between partitions and used it as a threshold between spaces. So art then just doesn't remain as something that's, like I'm mentioning again and again, slapped onto a wall. It becomes very integral to space making, integral to how you perceive space, integral to how you start conversations, what you talk about, how you talk about it, because it just becomes who you are. It becomes a part of your personality. So I think that to us was a beautiful sort of project where we've expressed ourselves using Indian art specifically. So, if I were to be very honest, I feel like this whole debate about budgeting and affordability of art, to my mind, is a very post-colonial idea. I mean, if you look at our entire history, I think within our country, art was embedded in the daily life. Whether you look at Lipan, whether you look at the way that people in Gujarat made them man homes and decorated them, people in Maharashtra did Varli art at the border of Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh. So a lot of it was already embedded in our daily lives. It was never kind of considered as a commodity or something separate from who you are. And I think when the British came in, that there was a lot of importance suddenly given to fine arts, because of which this innate knowledge that we've already had within the country, or whether it is painting, whether it is building construction, whether it is putting things together, whether it is daily objects and things that we make ourselves from metal, mud, wood, etc., I think was suddenly kind of now looked down upon, because of which a lot of people started to think of art as something that was elitist in nature, whereas art in our country was never necessarily like that. So I think what we very consciously do with our practice is that we never propagate art as something that needs to be bought to decorate a space, or the art needs to be expensive for it to talk to a client. For us, art could be something as simple as your grandmother's woven sort of piece of fabric that you very delicately sort of saved for yourself, and how that then can become something that you enjoy and cherish for the rest of your life within that space, or could also kind of come from the idea of how you're building your space. So, say for example, you come from an area where there's a certain style of construction, there's a certain kind of home that you've lived in before, and now you only have a memory of. What if that is used in a contemporary fashion to make that new space for you? And then the art and the craft is sort of embedded in this space. So then the question of affordability really never arises, because you're in some sense educating your own client about what the value of a lot of these older practices and knowledge that now has been passed down generations is, that there's just so much value found in it already that they then definitely want to be around that sort of narrative and will and live with that narrative. So I think for us, art is more about that and then just kind of going to a gallery and purchasing a piece. Yes, but going to a gallery and purchasing a piece is also as important as anything else, because a lot of art is also about how you kind of respond to it and feel around it, right? So a lot of that can come from a lot of personal experience when you go to a space and look at a painting or look at a sculpture or look at a piece of artwork made. So not sort of negating that idea, but I think it's very, very important to also start to imbibe art in all its different facets that art comes with. Yes, it definitely does vary, because I think each category of project or each vertical that we look at within this space making exercise, I think is different, calls for a different approach, calls for a different way of space planning. But like I said in my earlier answers, that for us the way that we design and and what we think of art is not necessarily different. It's sort of amalgamated. So one follows the other or one informs the other and vice versa. So a lot of idea of how we're going to be bringing the aspect of art into a project is something that just comes as a gut feeling while we start with the design of the project. Is never is kind of treated as, oh, now we finished this project, now how to spruce up this project with a piece of artwork, you know. I think sometimes even with the way that we draw, because we rely on a lot of like drawing with hand to ideate, there already is a lot of character of what we want to do within the drawing. And that for us, fortunately, so far has worked out as also a method to convince our clients, and yes, this is what we need to do. Right. So, yes, the typology of what you're going to do might vary with the typology of the project. But I think the process through which you approach that, I think this is rather visceral and very personal and is reliant on, say, like a gut feeling or a vibe more than what that particular program is and how that pragmatic sort of need requires a certain kind of artwork within it. So I think that's how we approach the work. I think what's happened in the last, I think, decade within India is that there's suddenly a lot of awareness about art in gender. Like art has become not just an after topic, but it has become the primary topic of also discussion at various forums, because of which a lot of budding artists are now getting a platform to talk about what they're really doing, what their practice entails, what they're making, what is the narrative and story behind it. And I think being architects and designers ourselves, because we also have so much other sort of like stuff to do, and we are technically the captains of the ship when we're doing a project. I think an art advisor as a collaborator in that process, I think can be extremely beneficial, because it just also opens up the architect and the designer's eye to the plethora of young sort of say art professionals that are suddenly budding up in this country, because they found a voice to now talk about it, right? So as I think designers and as people from the fraternity, I feel like it's our responsibility to also give them voice, to collaborate with them, to bring them to a forefront where they can start to talk about what work they're doing. And I feel like an art advisor in that sort of aspect can really be helpful, because they could be in some sense the promoters of a lot of these young artists that can then come into a lot of our spaces, collaborate with us, kind of ideate with us, and then kind of imbibe their visions of what art can be within that space, along with a lot of designers. Like I said, I mean, I'm a proponent of a lot of Indian, like an old Indian art, which is a lot of our culture and heritage, and it's completely lost now with so much emphasis given to contemporary art. And the way that we found the leather puppet artisan from Andhra, who probably is one of the only two people or the two families that remain now that are making these. I feel like an art advisor could really play a very important role in also uplifting a lot of these arts that are being lost within our country. So one thing that's sort of coming to the back of my mind at this point would be, say for example, Richard Serra. I mean, he makes uh, art with metal. We a lot of people think of it as sculpture, but it's also very very special in nature. I mean, you could very easily kind of sort of also see architecture within what he makes. A lot of Doshi's work is also like that, right? Like even the pavilion that he probably last conceptualized and now is made in the Vitra campus, to me is also very, very artistic in nature as much as it is about architecture. So I think from, like I've said throughout my interview, I think a lot of connotations of art that we've kind of preconceived in our minds that only has to be a painting that goes up onto a wall or a sculpture that goes in one corner and sort of uplifts the space. To my mind, a lot of these architects and artists in general are now pushing that sort of boundary to say what if the space is like art, or what if the form of the space is like art, or what if the form of the architecture is like art. And I think that to me is the great shift in thinking and kind of widening our horizons of where art and architecture come together as one very, very important cultural practice within the country, and sort of becoming the backbone of how this country also how the country sort of progresses forward with the identity of what India really is. So I think, to my mind, I think that's something that is very, like I said, I think in the last 10 years, there in general has been an ongoing conversation about art. You know, you see a lot of art events kind of now coming up within our societies. At least in Bombay, we have gallery weekends, we have India Art Fair, we have India Art Fair, Delhi and Bombay both. We have a lot of new galleries coming up across the country, which is in some sense amazing because it's giving a voice to a lot of budding architects. And I think what's very interesting about this is that a lot of these galleries are now also, like I said, widening their gamut of what they consider art. So you could also have a furniture exhibition that is very artistically bent. You could have lighting as an art exhibition. You could have paintings. You could have sculpture. You could have ceramics. You could have um, floorings, you could have any of that considered art now, fabrics, textiles. So I think that, to my mind, is just incredible as sort of an art revolution that's kind of now brimming within our country. And I think what, as designers, we could do is never think of this as the last layer in our projects, but sort of start our projects with the thought of how art can be imbibed within that, either as a concept or as something that's absolutely pivotal in the way that you design your projects. And I think that can really help not just collaborate with other design professionals and artists, but at the same time give a lot of the young artists a voice and a space for expression. And I think that's what the beauty of architecture really is.